Comic books are popular and stand out for being one of the most dynamic and visually pleasing forms of media. And with hundreds upon hundreds of new comics releasing every week, out of all of them, why does Invincible stand out? Even after its final issue being aired in 2018, people still talk about and praise this comic. Invincible really is a great comic read for a lot of reasons, but a big one for me is because it differentiates itself from other comic book and hero tropes. Invincible takes comic and hero tropes and flips it on its head. Even when Mark is fighting a recurring villain or passing off the mantle or even going back in time, it doesn't feel generic or stale. It feels new, inventive, and unique because Robert Kirkman's fantastic storytelling makes a deep and emotional story. From Omni-Man and Invincible's father-son relationship to Robot and Amanda's relationship, Invincible's story is always changing and growing. Robert Kirkman has this way of pulling the reader in, so once you start reading his comics, it's really hard to put down. It's hard to get this feeling at other comic companies like Marvel or DC because they have so many similar and familiar stories and so many intertwining storylines that it makes it hard to know what you're even reading. But for Invincible, you see that Kirkman has one clear storyline, one clear vision, and we're seeing and reading that storyline. Mark is a very relatable protagonist, right from issue 1. This is incredibly good because you can relate and understand Mark from the very beginning. You can't really get that from Marvel or DC because their heroes have decades and decades worth of history. So even if they do a reboot or a reimagining of that character, they're still going to take elements from past comics, which makes it hard for new readers to really relate and get an emotional connection to those characters. But for Invincible, it has no decade-old history. It has its main run with 144 issues with a couple spin-offs on the side, and it makes it incredibly easier to like and relate to those characters. We know where Mark lives, we catch up with his friends, and we see where his family lives. And that makes Mark and everyone in this comic feel like real and emotional characters. Another thing that's great about Invincible is that every single character has a purpose and character arc. Omni-Man and the Viltrumites get arcs, and even small characters like the Mauler twins, Bulletproof, and Powerplex get arcs of their own. And this just makes Invincible's world feel more real and grounded. Invincible also only has 2 authors and 2 artists, which makes the series have consistent storytelling and consistent art. And speaking about the art inside this comic, the art in Invincible is incredible. Ryan Otley, the series' consistent artist, makes the fights feel like they're real, like each blow counts, and he depicts violence in a gory but comedic way. Some fights in this series honestly left me speechless because of how much gore is in it. I think the gore and violence enhances the story in this situation because you can feel each blow that person throws or takes. Kirkman wrote these characters fantastically. Each character has so much personality and has lots of moral dilemmas, like Mark having the dilemma of doing what's right or what's necessary to keep the city safe, or Omni-Man's dilemma of killing his own son just to satisfy the Viltrumites. Stuff like that makes Kirkman's characters feel real, grounded, and dynamic. Invincible has one big storyline that eventually ends, and everything that happens in the story matters. Every smirk, every frown, every kill matters. Every panel matters. That element makes Invincible feel fresh, real, and satisfying to read. At the end of the day, Invincible isn't trying to subvert your expectations in any way. It's just trying to reinvent and redefine superhero comics and tropes. And it's a love letter to superhero comics. It tries to keep elements that we love from superhero comics and incorporate it into Invincible. And my final point of why I love Invincible, or why at least you guys should give it a chance, is because that the story has an ending. There's an end to this fantastic story, and that's incredible because most superhero comics from Marvel or DC won't get endings simply because they make too much money, and Marvel and DC would never end them because they would stop, getting the money from the characters. But Robert Kirkman doesn't care about how much money the comic makes or how much, Invincible makes. He just cares about the story, the characters, and he created a bittersweet ending for this spectacular comic. At the end of the day, I love Invincible, and I loved reading every single issue of it. Invincible is a great comic, and the animated show for it is top-notch. It's great as well. So that's all I got for you guys today, and remember to stay safe, and at the end of the day, remember that we're all, in our own way, we're all invincible.